Hello friends, welcome to my channel Sushant Chesswise. Today we are going to look at the next topic, that is the theoretical Rook Endgame, and we are going to look at the case of Rook pawn. And today we will see the king is placed in front of the Rook pawn, and today we will try to understand when the opponent's Rook is cutting off the king on the Rook's pawn, how much distance is required for our Rook to cut off the opponent's king. So we are going to try to understand when the position is winning and when it will be drawn. Generally, in cases of Philidor's position, where the pawn has divided the board into two parts, the defender's king has to be on the shorter side and the Rook gives check from the longer side. Now it's a Rook pawn, so what has happened? There is no short side as such. We are on the edge of the board. So the Rook is going to give checks from the long side, but for that our Rook will be able to interpose. And now the king, opponent's king, is of course on one side of the pawn. So this distance of the king and pawn is very important. Usually the distance of 3 files from the pawn, 1, 2 and 3, if the king is on the 4th, is generally considered sufficient. But in such a case of Rook pawn, we see that 3 files distance is not enough. This is the ideal position from which white is able to win. After seeing the method how white can convert this to a win, we will come to know if the black king is anywhere closer. Let's say king is on the e file, then the position will become drawn. So the first problem that white is facing now is how to get his king out, because unless the king comes out, the pawn cannot promote to queen. For that we have to challenge the black rook, and the black rook can be challenged by our rook from only 2 squares, that is b8 and b7. On any other square the rook is unsupported. So the fastest route that we can see is rook c2, rook c8 and rook b8. So that is going to take us 3 moves, and by that time if the black king manages on c7, then as it is our king will not be able to move away. Let's play the moves and see what happens. Rook c2, king e7, rook c8, and here the black king has 2 ways, one kd7 and other kd6. kd6 happens to be the main move, but it looks logical to attack the rook first. So kd7, rook b8, and now the black rook has to give weight to the white king. So the rook can move anywhere from c1, a1 to any other place. c1 and a1 are the ideal places. From c1 the rook gives option of giving check from the 7th rank or from the b5. Now king b7, and the white king now tries to move zigzag and escape from the checks. So now the threat is a8 queen. So rook b1 check first, king a6, rook takes rook, then the pawn would promote to queen. So again rook a1 check, kb6, rook b1 check, and the king comes out from the square c5, taking the advantage of the fact that the b8 rook is supported by the pawn. And now after some checks, king will just come cross and attack the black rook. So after rc1, kd4, rd1, ke3, re1, kd2, rook checks are over. Only move rook a1, after which a8 queen, rook takes, and king and rook are able to checkmate the black king. Now we have to look at the main move kd6, where we will try to trap the white king in the opposition. Let's go to the main line. After rook c8, the main move is king d6. Again white plays rook b8, rook c1, and again the only way is to move the king and make space for the pawn to promote. So what we see here, after the move rook b1 check, it's impossible for white now to escape from a and b files. For instance, after king a6, rook a1 check, we see that kb5 is not possible because a7 is hanging. And after kb6 check, rook b1, the king doesn't have the c5 square which he had in the previous line because of kd7. and after the move king a5, again rook a1 check, king has to go back to protect his a pawn. So basically, suppose white does this, then he will have to again go kb6, rook b1 check, king a6, rook a1 check, kb7, rook b1, and we reach the position from where we started with the move king a6. So white has to play the only move kc8 here instead of k6. Suppose white has played it accidentally, then he should repeat the moves and reach this position again. But now black can use a tactic rook c1 check. Again if kb7, then rook b1 check. So the king hides in front of the opponent's king, but this opposition is what black uses to set a trap. Now comes rook h1. The threat is to checkmate. After a8 queen, rook h8 would be checkmate. What should white do now? Because if he tries to play ke8, then rook check from h8, kf7, rook check, and the pawn would be lost. If king c8, then again rook c1 check, kd8, then again rook h1. So white has only move over here, that is rook b6 check. But now it looks like whenever white will promote the pawn to queen, the rook h8 check will win the queen in a skewer. Firstly, if the king moves away, then simply like white can play the good move rook a6. He will control the queening square, and see the rook has now managed behind the passed pawn. And after the rook check, king c7, rook check, kb6, rook check, kb5, checks have been stopped, and the pawn would promote to queen. So after rook h8, a8, queen, rook a8, rook a8, and white wins. So after rook b6 check, it's necessary for black to keep the rook attacked. Now the problem is after the move rook a6, black can easily go rook check, force the king away, and after the move kd7, rook h7 check. Now after king e6, rook check, and the rook would be lost. And if the king goes little away, that would be the right time to give check and take the rook in front of the pawn, so that the king can go to b5 and b6 and attack the a7 pawn. After kc5, it looks as if the position will be drawn, but white has a nice tactic, the move rook c6 check, and he gets into a winning position. Now the point is very simple. The rook will manage to go to the c8 square, and white will be able to queen his pawn. Let's look at some variations. Of course, after king c6, a8 equal to queen check, and queen takes the rook in the skewer. So the king has to choose between d5 and the b5 squares. After kd5, white can, as I told you, simply play rook a6. This time the king will manage to move from c7 to b6. So after the check, rook h8, kc7, if rook a8, then kb7, and then the pawn promotes. So forced to give check, then the king goes to b6, and now again after rook check, king moves to b5, keeping the a6 rook protected, and the pawn would queen. You can now easily say that after the move rook c6 check, it's game over. Let's look at the last variation, kb5. Now again if we queen the pawn, we see that there is rook h8. Here white can do rook c8. White threatens to queen the pawn. There is no mating threat over here. And after the move rook h8 check, king c7, rook h7 check, king b8, king hides behind the rook and takes control of the queening square. And after kb6, just a8 equal to queen, and the rook is unable to give check from the b7 square, and white wins the game. So we notice that the move rook c6 plays a very important role in converting this position to a win. So this was the theory of the rook pawn when the king is in front of the rook's pawn. Last time we saw the rook was in front of his own pawn. In the upcoming lessons, we will be looking at practical rook endgames. Do like, share and subscribe the channel. Thanks for your time.